Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the fourth installment in the nonprofit social media nerds. We're doing a series on what's next, what's the next normal for nonprofits in a post-pandemic world. And we were all just talking about how it's probably not going to be a fully post-pandemic world. But Yolanda, you said something beautiful that you had heard, how we're not going to return to what we're used to. We're going to reimagine what we're used to. So I love that. And I think that that's really what these conversations are about. You know, no one has a crystal ball and no one can see into the future, but we're doing our best to try to figure out what are we taking with us, what are we learning, and hopefully what are we changing for the better. So I'm Julia Campbell, and welcome to my Facebook page. My co-host, as always, is Josh Hirsch in West Palm Beach, Florida, the Director of Mission and Communication from Susan G. Komen, Florida. I also have Yolanda F. Johnson, President of YFJ Consulting, President of Women in Development New York, and a professional musician, which we want to talk about. I was going to say we should probably try, well, I don't want to put you on the spot to like perform, but that would be really cool. That could be the next one. We also have Jonathan Richardson, Communications and Special Projects Officer at the Community Foundation for the Greater Capital Region, and Brandon Stokes, Senior Director, Global Foundation Engagement and Development at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, ALSAC. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. And to our audience members, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Usually we get a pretty diverse group from even around the world. I mean, we've had people from all different countries, Josh, right?
Yeah,
we had Greece the other time. We had Australia. We've had UK.
We've definitely gone international, which is great.
Yeah, I know. It is pretty great. So let us know where you're watching from. Type your questions into the questions. My technology will undoubtedly fail, as it always does on my end. So Josh will be monitoring the questions on Facebook as we go. So let us know. The topic today is, it's a big one. What's next for philanthropy and foundations, or what's the next normal? What are we seeing? What are we envisioning? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of do like a round robin for each of the guests and let them introduce themselves, let them tell you where they're working and what their role is, and then what they're seeing or maybe how their role has changed in the midst of the pandemic. So I don't know, Josh, do you want to go first? If we're going in alphabetical order.
I'll be happy to start. Hi, everybody. We as a foundation, Susan G. Komen ourselves, are grant making. A lot of people don't realize that, but here in Florida, we give out on average anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000 a year. And, our grant making has had to change as a result of COVID-19, while we're still able to make a great impact across the state. And one way we did that immediately was through our treatment assistance fund. We know that right now, regardless of whether or not you are able to work, your treatment has to continue. Breast cancer hasn't stopped. So we made an initial $50,000 investment to make that footprint all across the state. So it doesn't matter where you are, whether or not you have access to a Komen-funded location, you can still get the support that you do need. But we also have looked at our grant making from a different perspective, because now a lot of the organizations that we work with have shifted their focus to immediate needs, focusing on COVID, focusing on testing and providing care to those patients. And something we've been working at for a while is moving towards a contracted model. So providing fee for service with these health organizations. And it's really great that we're able to now partner with some other large health organizations throughout the state to directly impact those women and men. So whereas before the grants were tied to smaller and some medium-sized organizations, this is now getting into major health institutions, because those are the ones that are going to continue. So, our focus hasn't changed. It's just the way that we're getting the funding out there.
Yep. All right. Yolanda, would you like to go? I'm especially interested in what you've been seeing in your role as women in development? Like, what have other development officers been seeing?
Well, I've been fortunate to have a somewhat unique perspective and role because of my work with consulting, with WID, and with a series that I'm currently authoring for the Chronicle of Philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
And it started with events and really examining and analyzing the intersection between donors and fundraisers and what's happening right now, and some of the beautiful things that are happening where we realize that we're all in this together, some of the creative things that are happening, even with, we were talking about DAFs and endowments, and now people are considering using endowments as collateral on other loans, and really talking to donors about unrestricting funds. So it's a bit of a sink or swim situation. And so we're really taking the swim. We're trying to swim together and figure out how to survive and to thrive. I've also been able to gain some perspective from institutional funders about how things have to change, especially with people of color-led organizations, but also how they're trying to reach out and develop those relationships of trust with organizations that usually may not have been a favorite or a normal grantee. So it's been, it's really run the gamut, but I am happy to say that I think everybody's trying to work together. It's a day-by-day evolution. But I think that if we keep working together, we're gonna, and being compassionate, donors have to understand what organizations are going through, and organizations have to understand what donors are going through, how their net worth has changed, how their capacity to give has changed, and how their philanthropic priorities have changed. So now that we're still in this response period, I guess, someone said the other day we're in recovery, and I was like, I don't think so. I think we're still responding.
Still in the middle of it.
Yeah. So that's what I've seen so far right now.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to get more into racial bias in philanthropy, and maybe, the Bridge Span and Echoing Green report that I love. If you didn't read it, it's really worth reading. I can put the link in the comments. So Jonathan, as a community foundation, tell us a little bit about what you do and kind of what you're seeing. What are you seeing in upstate New York?
Yeah, so I'm the communications and special projects officer. So I manage all our communications, PR, and help the development team. But I also do all our community initiatives, just because we're a small team. We're a small foundation, only 8 staff. But which also means I got deemed the tech expert during this pandemic, because I was the youngest to kind of coordinate stuff as well. But we really saw things mid-March as like we were seeing things around the country of just responding, and we just wanted to act quickly and kind of respond that as well. And a lot of community foundations actually did this too. There was actually just an opinion article recently how community foundations were on like the frontline responders of philanthropy to just corral and rally stuff. So I know in a few days we corralled dozens of funders via a conference call, and we're like, we have to do something. We convened a fund and quickly raised money to deploy out grants, and we raised nearly $1 million for this effort and have quickly deployed most of those grants out. So but that priority has been responding to emerging needs, also connecting with government officials to identify gaps in those services, just because some government funding was coming in the pipeline for some stuff, or some were, quick to adapt with things. So we really wanted to look at the gaps, and, we serve multi-counties, and despite counties being next to each other, each county worked differently. So we had to work with that as well, and kind of identify, where it is. So we really focus on food and food systems as priority to address. We focus on basic needs, so people helping navigate resources, connecting to resources, especially those who wouldn't get resources and support through, federal stimulus packages. And then, look at housing and shelter was a huge thing. Like the homeless organizations were really concerned about how they were going to handle something if, someone was tested positive, and handling that too as well. And identifying gaps in healthcare and mental health care too. So those were kind of our priorities, and we're still kind of evaluating things and doing this too. But most of it was like focusing on emerging needs. We, have made things more simple. All our grants have been unrestricted general operating grants. Nonprofits tell us what they need, but they've been mostly general operating. We simplified the application process too. Like we just have a simple Google form that went through, which many other folks did. Like no one's going to review budgets or all these other things right now. We're just like, just tell us how much you need and be brief about it, just so that we know, what your needs are and stuff like that too. And some organizations that we really trusted that knew we're on the front line so busy, we just reached out and we're like, hey, here's money to support you right now. We know you're do good work and you're busy. We responding to that. But we evaluated kind of our undiscretionary dollars, figured out what we could contribute to this too, but also considering like what is still important to, moving forward, because we're still in this response phase, although some of New York State is opening up. So they're thinking they're in recovery, but they're really still responding to stuff as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. I love what you said about community foundations being on the ground and really knowing the local population and the needs of the locality best. I think that's something I've been seeing too, especially where I live. So Brandon, I would love to learn more about what you do and what you've been seeing in your work with foundations at St. Jude's.
Yeah, so pertaining to the question as far as just the pandemic, I'm going to speak at it from two separate angles. Kind of starting with the pandemic, I was with United Way Worldwide, whereas we operate in over 40 countries and 1,800 communities across the world. So, and now I'm working with St. Jude. So, two different perspectives, two different operation models, two different business models, both still nonprofits. But so it's been, I've seen a lot of disparities between the larger, more corporate ran style nonprofits as opposed to the smaller nonprofits. Obviously, the larger nonprofits are going to receive more larger funding, larger gifts, while the smaller nonprofits might not necessarily receive those larger gifts. Differences in between messaging and donor outreach, and just in terms of being able to pivot quickly, doing virtual events, having virtual conversations, even just basic business operations, so you can even get to the point to where you can have those donor conversations. So first, as far as being able to shift in a virtual world, working from home is one thing, because if you aren't able to sustain your operations, then that can then spill over into your donors and your messaging. So you have that trend of being in a pandemic, but also having to create that virtual engagement with your donors and with your team. But then secondly is being able to effectively communicate with those donors, the support that you're asking them for, and then allowing them the opportunity to give to you during this sensitive matter. So, there's been many of ways that we can engage with donors that might not necessarily have the funds that they used to have. But I've seen a lot of companies kind of engage their employees doing virtual volunteering and other opportunities like that. So that way they can still feel engaged and still feeling part of the philanthropic process, but might not necessarily have the opportunity to give on a monetary level.
That's so interesting. And that's something that I've seen, the disparity between the larger organizations who already have this kind of built-in team. I mean, everyone has been affected by the pandemic, but they might have the ability to, like you said, either pivot or adapt or quickly transition to digital events, or they might already have really great relationships with their donors and the funders, and they can easily call them up and talk to them. And the smaller nonprofits might really be hanging by a thread already and trying to transition everything to a work from home environment. I think for a lot of my clients has been one of the most challenging things, especially for leadership when you're trying to lead through this, uncharted waters that we're in, where there's no guidebook, there's no map, and we have no idea really what's going to happen. So I guess my next question, and I'm going to throw it first to Yolanda, is what is what in your opinion is the role of philanthropy in a pandemic? And are we getting it right, or what's missing, or what can we be doing better?
Well, I think that the role of philanthropy in a pandemic is to jump in and to help in whatever capacity is needed. Because if we don't survive, if nonprofits, I always say the fundraiser is illuminating the path to the good work for the philanthropists. We're making that clear, how they can help. And what I've seen is that philanthropists really do want to help. We are guiding them. They're like, what can we do? How does this work? And one of the loveliest things I've seen that I mentioned briefly before is rethinking and reimagining, if you will, unrestricting the things that are required on reporting, just saying, you have that grant, use that grant to pay the light bill, use it to pay the salaries, use it to pay whatever you need to do with it right now to survive, and then we can revisit things later. So I think adapting, being flexible. I've heard people talk about that airplane rule where they're making sure that they're going to survive as well. And so I think that institutional funders are being really wise about their internal workings and rethinking their pace of giving also, because I know a lot of nonprofits, from what I'm hearing from the WID members and different people, they're like, this is great right now, and then what's it going to look like at year end? So, and then I think the other role of philanthropy is just to stay in touch, and again, to reach out, to rethink how you've given, to whom you've given, and if you can, broaden that and reach more people in whatever way is possible. So to sum that up, just reimagine, rethink it, and be here to help society continue and help those grantees be able to continue their work and survive. And then we'll all stay in touch and collaborate together on how we move forward.
I love that. I don't know, Josh, what do you think? What do you think the role of philanthropy is?
I think it's right what Jonathan's foundation is doing, because we're seeing the same focus here for our community foundation in Palm Beach County: food, basic needs, and shelter. They launched an emergency COVID fund and have done very well, raised over 3.3, and I think have distributed over $1 million of that or so thus far. And it's those organizations that are on the ground providing those needs that we need at this immediate time. That's the focus. As we said before, Julia, while some nonprofits don't think of themselves as essential, everyone is an essential nonprofit because they're providing services for their clients, for their support base, for their donors. But it's from a shifting of your funding perspectives. If we know that right now this is where we need to be funding, and this is where we need to focus. For us, we saw that immediate need of treatment. Those dollars had to go to those women and men still battling, and our investment in that, reflected that. So it's being aware of the situation around you and knowing that you can make change now, and how are you going to use your investment in those areas to make it happen.
I love that. And I really do. I do think, there's a fantastic article in Newsweek about how philanthropy is, the pandemic is philanthropy's shining moment. And I think that what I've been seeing is a lot of institutions and corporations, corporate donors, foundations, really making the concerted effort to figure out what needs to be done now and listening more than they're talking. And it used to be that they, would issue RFPs and say, this is what we want to fund. And now it's much more like, okay, what do we need to fund? What is happening on the ground? And like you just said, Josh, I have seen a lot of funds, local funds here in Boston, even for like quote unquote non-COVID essential related, which I don't believe in. I believe every mission is essential, but things like arts funding or freelancing or music, education, historical societies. And I think that people are really starting to understand kind of the depth and breadth of the nonprofit sector. I hope that's something that I hope to see. I also, just to add, I think philanthropy's role is also really advocacy. I think that these funders should do, a lot, Bill and Melinda Gates do this all the time. They actually talk about the role of the sector and how vital the sector is. And they educate other funders on the importance of giving, even if you have $10, or if you have a DAF, or if you have a family foundation, and how to structure it, and how to best give back what you can, based on your passions. I really think that philanthropists, they do have, I don't want to say responsibility, but I kind of think they do to educate people and advocate. Do you agree, Brandon? Did you want to say something?
No, it very much is a responsibility. Philanthropists essentially have a due diligence to where they invest their funds. It speaks to, it can reshape and reinvent in terms of how we look at philanthropy and how companies make decisions. When a philanthropist invests $100 million into a fund or somewhere else, folks see that, people see that, companies see that, and that matters. When you give to a certain cause, that matters, right? So during the pandemic or outside of the pandemic, that matters. Obviously, it's going to be highlighted more during the pandemic. So, I think parts of the roles that I've seen towards in philanthropy is it's brought out a number of celebrities. It's brought out a number of people from different spectrums. And in many cases, it has brought us together for the greater cause, right? So at St. Jude, we host this, it was a Take 5. It was a virtual concert that we had, and we had a number of artists and a number of entertainers that performed. And it was a fundraiser that we had, but it was an amazing turnout. It was a virtual event, but there was levels of engagement there amongst donors and amongst the participants. So in many cases, it's bringing us closer together and allowing us, although we may be stuck at home, we may be in with family members and other folks, is giving us the opportunity to still have that one-on-one connection that we're probably, still looking for that we can't have right now.
I love that. I know we talk a lot about virtual events and whether or not, all events necessarily need to be transitioned, or whether some events need to just be reimagined. I love that word, reimagine. Not reinvented, not pivot. We say pivot all the time, but pivot, people are still saying it. So I think that we might have the curse of knowledge there a little bit. But I really believe in like you just said, you put your money where your values are. That's what helps determine the focus of where we're going. And that's what really determines and shows our worldview and our values. So Jonathan, I want to ask you a little bit about, how the community foundation, how the decision-making process happens, and what is your advice to other community foundations out there that might be struggling a little bit to make this change, to adapt to this new way of thinking?
Yeah, I will say we do have, what work we're doing, a lot of community foundations are doing similar. Like we actually have kind of a coalition of folks that connect every week to share ideas and share communications and stuff like that.
Collaboration, that's a good one.
Yeah, so we have been sharing resources. There's like a Dropbox folder. I can steal stuff from other community foundations as well. But I think the thing is, really identifying our role of what it is. Like, I know we respond quickly, like we obviously responded and created our fund much quicker than, some of the government response. And we recognize that, but we also recognize what our lane is. So, going back to the advocacy point too, someone told us about in upstate New York, there's a huge internet inequity issue of there's like access to quality internet, and now everyone's using it. So like there's kids, there's people who are trying to work and they don't have access to quality internet, or they don't have access to technology, or too many people are using it. So in that sense, we realized that wasn't our lane, but our lane could be, using our voices to advocate, to our, our state and local governments to say, hey, this is an issue we care about because this affects other things as well, or advocating for more mental health, stuff. There's a huge mental health practice shortage around here too. So like advocating for more of that systems and stuff like that too as well. So, I think for most of us, it's also like looking at our current, what systems worked before and what didn't. We're also looking at, how can we be more virtual, in that sense, in case we were fortunate that we could have people go to the office each week because we were still cutting grant checks. But what happens if we can't do that? Like, how can we, do more HCH payments right to nonprofits' bank accounts? Like, how can we, make it easier for all our systems to be accessed virtual? Like, we still have a CRM system that is, like locally based instead of cloud-based too. So like, what does that look like in that sense as well? And, some of our, grant making decisions too, like, did we need some of this information before? Like, we would ask for all this information thinking we would need like audits and financials and all these lists of stuff. And when we are trust organizations, we know we don't have to ask for that much as well, or really take a look at like who we're funding and how we can really direct the dollars that we know are just going to go right to the community, be used in an efficient way and really make an impact of what's needed in our community as well. So that kind of is conversations we've been having, as thinking moving forward as well.
I love it. I really think that the ability to just think strategically and not have that curse of this is the way things have always been done, or this is the status quo, or that a lot of nonprofits that I've been working with have been kind of paralyzed and thinking we're just going to get back to it when the dust settles. And I have to say, well, is the dust really going to settle? And if the dust does settle, it's not going to be in the same configuration that it was before. It's going to settle a little bit differently. So planning for as much as we can, planning for the future. So Yolanda, I wanted to see, in your work with WID and your consulting work and, your work with the Chronicle of Philanthropy, what are some of maybe like the shining examples that you've seen of the way philanthropy and foundations or donors have stepped up in this pandemic?
Well, I can think of a few examples. One of the things in general that I'm loving that I'm seeing is that donors are loyal to the organizations that they support. So even, there's I call it the great pivot of 2020. So, everybody has their own rendition of it. And, for some donors, they're like, if an organization is going to pivot over to the virtual space for an event, I don't know when I'm going to go to anything in person anymore, but I'm going to continue to support. And that's the trend that we've seen. Also, the numbers, don't lie, that donors are still giving. So that's really great. There's a really beautiful example in New York City. Great Performances. Are you all familiar with Great Performances, the big catering and event presentation production company?
No, I'm not.
Well, it's a major player in all events in New York City. And they realized, they did the analysis, it was going to be very difficult for them if there aren't any events happening. Well, what are you going to do? Right. And so they did this massive early pivot and said, food instability is going to be a big issue for a lot of the people, even in their own community. They're in the Bronx. So they took all that delicious fancy food and they created these amazing meals, and they were feeding about 10,000 frontline responders each day. And so that was amazing. And they even created a special, ergonomically, you can eat it standing up, if you're in the hallway before you need to go see a patient or something, whatever it is. And they were just feeding people, food became the conduit for the good work in a completely different way. And the CEO of that company, Liz Newmark, is very philanthropic, and they gave a percentage of it to the Sylvia Center that uses food to help young people, especially young people of color and underserved, to achieve their goals in life. So that was a really great example. And it helped the business model. It helped everything. I loved it. And then I know that I've seen from places like the Heinz Endowments in Pittsburgh, they've got some great people on staff there, like Shonda McDill, who are reimagining things, really rethinking things, letting you contact them on LinkedIn even, because, it's like LinkedIn has really raised
yes.
profile.
Oh, I know. That's how we met. Well, I stalked you from the Chronicle of Philanthropy, so.
No, but it's kind of like, I keep joking, but it's like, I know you're home. So, but, right? So I just love the way that they're rethinking things and recognizing all of the disparities and making themselves a little more accessible and trying to help organizations, just survive and continue to thrive. So there are a lot of great things happening out there with people making their own pivots in a way that's meaningful for them.
That's awesome. Yeah, Josh, I know you said you had an example from the community foundation where you live.
Yeah, and this is kind of what Jonathan and I were speaking about before, is that we had submitted for a programmatic grant back in January. It went through the LOI process, and typically you would have, if you made it to the next round, you would have a site visit. Well, unfortunately, we weren't able to have that site visit, and it was still out there. The LOI and proposal was still pending, and we knew that the announcement day would be in mid-May, and all of a sudden we got a fabulous email a week or so ago that we had been funded, but more so that the community foundation as a whole, once again, as we were talking about what is the role of philanthropy, well, they realized that this programmatic grant that you submitted 4 or 5 months ago might not be your immediate need now as an organization. So they changed all the programmatic funding to an unrestricted operating expenses grant, which is incredible. First off, how many foundations do you ever get funding from for operating expenses, let alone unrestricted support? So it's the forward thinking of the foundation themselves that allows the other nonprofits in the community to do what is of greatest need then. And it was that was a really good day. That was a really good day.
Yay. That's fantastic. I love that trend that I've been seeing towards unrestricted funding. I mean, VULE, if you're not familiar, VULE, he's Nonprofit AF on Twitter, and that's his blog. He's been talking about this for years and years and years about the unsustainable restrictions that a lot of big foundations are, put on their grant recipients. Every year, having to submit the same forms and having to go through the 30-hour grant writing process and reporting process, and how, leaders of color in the nonprofit sector tend to not be at the table a lot of the time on the golf course, or buddying around with the heads of the foundation and the boards. And so that kind of leaves them out of these decisions, but he's been really doing a lot of great work on that. So I don't know who to take this one, but maybe I'll ask Brandon. What do you see as, philanthropy's role as really changing things for the better, especially now? Like, what do you see as the opportunity to see that the pandemic, this is also my opinion, the pandemic really has just shown a spotlight on inequality and inequity, especially in America. And there are so many more problems, I think, coming to the forefront that people that are doing the work on the ground always knew about, but other people now are seeing it. So what do you think the role of philanthropy is in continuing to do this work and, maybe, hopefully leading the way? And I'm kind of putting words in your mouth. And if you don't think that's true, then.
No, I think this industry should challenge corporate partners, foundation partners, philanthropists, other funders. We should challenge those, because if your company doesn't have a CSR department, then it's showing right now, right? It's showing, because those companies that are able to adapt and that have a corporate social responsibility program right now, or at least have a department, it could be a department of one, which some companies are, but if you have that presence, then that's showing right now. I think, how we move forward is going to be very vital in terms of how the next 3 to 5 to 10 years are going to look for us. This industry has evolved so much and so quickly over the past 10 to 15 to 20 years. And this is, like most folks say, this is unprecedented and unparalleled and all the, words you want to use, but this is our new normal now. And I think the quicker we can kind of get on board with it and change and realize that this is our new reality, then the quicker we're going to be able to move forward. I think part of the challenges I see is the staff or the leaders in the nonprofit or the foundation field might be able to adapt with change, but the boards might be the ones that have that reluctancy to make those particular changes due to whatever reasons. So it could be political reasons, it could be other revenue generating reasons, it could be a number of things. So I think collectively, if organizations can, this has shedded a light on organizations' ability or inability to look at themselves in a like an assessment or a holistic level and realize that, wow, maybe we aren't doing things the way that we could be doing, or maybe we should be doing this better, or maybe we should bring in this new department, maybe a chief experience officer or some chief revenue officer or something like that. So I think this is going to allow companies and foundation partners and funders to challenge one another. And certainly, I think with challenge comes a lot of positivity out of that. So.
Yeah, I love that. When we had Tom Ahern on a couple of weeks ago, he was saying, he doesn't want to sound callous because, hundreds of thousands of people are dead and dying, or thousands of people, but he sees this as an opportunity. He really sees this as, like Phoenix rising from the ashes. Like we need to be able to leverage the attention that we're getting right now. And Yolanda, like you were saying, the surge is happening right now in terms of fundraising and people giving and people paying attention to the needs of others and wanting to give back. But what does that look like? Like, can we sustain that momentum? And
Right.
what does that look like in annual giving? So, I mean, I guess my question for you, I'll give it to you, Yolanda, is what advice would you give to nonprofit fundraisers right now as we're trying to navigate through all of this? I mean, what's your top tip? I know you probably have a lot of it. I have a lot of advice too, but what's like your top few tips?
I think the top tip would be, can I have two, please?
Yes, sure.
So
As
my
many as you
first
want.
tip would be the donor relations piece. So I think that the communication lines have to be kept open. So I think that's extremely important to let your donors know what's going on and let the philanthropic side help them understand, engage them, because we really are all in this together, right? So it's not just about writing a check. People are going to be a lot more discriminating about to whom they give, and they really want to have that head and hand and heart aspect of everything. Now they're all in, and then the other thing is really examine yourselves as organizations and do the tough analysis. That's one of the topics I'm going to broach next is, have you experienced mission creep? What is fundamental to who you are as an organization, and what's the most important for you what work for you to continue to do? So just looking inside and then communicating well.
All right. Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes left. I like to keep these to 45 minutes. And if we go over, I mean, no big deal. But I wanted to ask Jonathan, and then maybe Josh, you could close it out. What is your top piece of advice for Jonathan, for nonprofits that are seeking funding right now or are looking to foundations for support?
I would say top advice, and we've seen this with many of them, is, if you aren't building trust, build that trust. I know it's definitely harder for some organizations to do that. And I know some foundations need to overcome their biases to make sure that they're building trust with organizations of many types of, organizations led by communities of color, by queer individuals, by minorities. Focus on that trust, because some of the trust has really led to easy kind of distributing of grant making, very simple decisions and stuff like that too. And kind of going back to Yolanda's point about donor relations, like we want to build relationships with you too. Like think about us. Build, show, be authentic with your needs. Like be honest about what's going on, and just build that relationship with us too as well. And also I would be, don't be afraid to check them too. Like, you know, we're not perfect individuals. Like, you should be able to say like, hey, this doesn't really work for me as well. Like, this made this harder for us too. Like, be honest with us, because I don't think we get that feedback enough. And I think that helps, you know, communicate. Like, I used to be, a professional fundraiser before I came to the foundation. And I think that helped make things easier with our process, because I was like, I'm not going to be focused on this long application if I have to focus on my increased needs, focus on redoing my spring event that's now virtual or whatever way and stuff like that too, and focus on keeping my family organized. And especially if I had kids, you know, dealing with that too as well. So, you know, don't be afraid to say like, hey, this doesn't really work for us. This is really hard. And if you built those great relationships, I think most foundations that will be receptive to hearing that, to say like, wow, maybe we should, you know, relook at things as well. But I know we partner with actually a lot of private foundations too to help their grant making, and they've looked at things to make things easier. So, you know, your valuable feedback and, you know, really will help the foundation think about moving forward and how they're doing things.
I love that so much. I love that so much. That's what Vu talks about. The two times I've been fortunate enough to see him speak, is that it really needs to be a partnership, and it needs to not be, you know, the foundation coming in and kind of saving the nonprofit. It really needs to be like, we can, like a couple, you know, we need to really be honest with each other. And if there's a problem or an issue and something, you know, dramatically happening, to give feedback. That's awesome. Thank you. What's your advice, Josh, for
Yolanda
Seeking Foundation? Yeah.
Yeah, so Yolanda hit right on it. The mission creep. Don't try to stray from your lane. Know who you are as an organization, and just because you see dollars are being given to food, shelter, you know, basic needs, if you don't fall into that, don't try to go after something that is, you know, that isn't true to who you are as an organization. So that would be my main piece of advice. But the same respect, the open lines of communication are so important with your donors. This is a time for you as a nonprofit or as a foundation or as, you know, whatever, to pick up the phone and call your supporters. Just do wellness check-ins. Just say, hey, is everything okay? Because you know what, when we come out of and we reimagine and rediscover who we are in this new world, they're going to remember those touches, those communications, just to see how you were doing. And when they are able to give again, they're going to remember that. And they're going to be the ones that you want to support, because donors don't stray from who they are.
I love it. Well, I think that's a fantastic note to end on. I just want to thank my guests so much. I know everyone is busy. I know, like me, and I always say it, the kids are still home. Schools are not open, running around, and, you know, and Yolanda lost her internet this morning, and like all sorts of crazy stuff happening. So thank you so much to all of my guests. I will put information in the comments and the caption if you want to learn more about any of the topics that we talked about today. But I really appreciate you being here with us. And next week is our last one. So Friday at noon, and Josh and I will wrap everything up, talk about the themes, and talk about really how to plan when it's impossible to plan. So some tips for planning when you can't plan, because Josh and I are both planners, and it's driving me nuts that I can't plan, but I've got some strategies for you. So if you've missed any episodes in the What's the Next Normal series, they're all on my Facebook page. So thank you so much. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much.